Judd, and today I'm Sue Brain, and today I am going to be asking Steve about the eighth house because it is a very enigmatic eighth house, and it's all to do with mystery and metamorphosis and transformation and deepening and intimacy, but it's also to do with legislation and taxes and other people's money and resources. So it's, and also to do with life crises. So there's a lot going on for the eighth house. And Steve, I want to ask you, what's the best way of interpreting the eighth house, and how do we work with it for the best of our clients?
I haven't got a clue.
That's such an eighth house thing to say.
The eighth house is like the 12th house. It's surrounded by cloud. It's mysterious. It's deep. It's illogical, irrational, unquantifiable. You cannot rationally analyze it or explain it. You can know it, sense it, feel it, intuit it, work with it. But the second you try and clarify it and classify it, put it into a box, you've lost it. If you go back in antiquity to the time when houses started being developing in astrology 2000 years ago, the eighth house was always known as the house of external resources, not just financial, but all forms of financial resources, all forms of resources. By the time we're into the 1500s, it changed and became the house of death. By the time we got to the early 1900s and the mid 1900s and the start of liberalism, it became the house of death and sex. And then it became sex, death, and taxes.
Well, they all go together, really.
Well, they do. There are three great inevitabilities of life. Look, the eighth house is, first of all, it's to do with external sources of finance. This can be business loan, bank loan, mortgage, inheritance, tax rebates, sponsorship, funding, investment. People with a lot of planets in the eighth house should never lend money. If they want to help people, give them it. And then if it comes back, it's a bonus. But if they lend them it and it doesn't come back, they've got serious problems. That's when the dark side of the eighth house can suddenly come up.
That's the Scorpio side.
Well, the eighth house relates to the Scorpio sign, which is Scorpio. The eighth house is ruled by Pluto on a natural horoscope. So, yeah, the eighth house is also the area of the occult. Now, when I say the occult, I do not mean woo-woo or spooky. I mean the occult as in hidden. When there's a total eclipse of the sun is occulted by the moon. So it's the area of hidden things. It's people with a strong eighth house are inevitably quite forensic. They have this ability to just sort of go, don't feel right. Let's go deep and have a good research and a good look. And they get down there in the dirt, in the verdigris, and they ferret around and eventually they find out what's going on. People, you can't lie to someone with a strong eighth house, not for long. They know.
They kind of like this, aren't they?
Oh, they know. And then if they know you've lied, that's it, you're toast. The eighth house, yes, it's magnetic. It's esoteric. It's not appropriate to say it's sexual, but it's not sensual either. It is not erotic per se. It doesn't have to do with sex as in love and passion and romance. It has to do with sex in terms of procreation. And many people have suggested, many poets and authors over the years have suggested that sex and death are not that far apart in certain ways.
Le petit mort.
Le petit mort, exactly.
For those that don't understand it, it's the orgasm. It's a French word. You die in orgasm, the
yes.
little death.
Yes, and strong eighth house individuals will get that. Yes.
Are you talking about, let's talk about, that sort of essence of tantric sex then, where sex is taken as something far deeper than just having a coupling. It's
Yes.
much more involved, and it's a sort of sense of almost going to the spiritual with it.
Indeed, particularly with certain forms of tantra, where the consummation of the orgasm is not too much denied, but delayed or postponed, because I've got to try and find a way of saying this without making it sound too raunchy. The build-up of the concentration of energy that can generate through certain forms of tantra is very elevational and very inspirational in terms of consciousness enhancement when practiced over a long period of time. And the sudden release of orgasm, all the petit mort brings, there's nothing negative about it, but it does mean that all of a sudden it's like that bubble bursts, and then you've got to rebuild it again.
It's existential. It sort of connects you with, well, the depth of who you are, isn't it? The depth of your
Yes.
your
The eighth house can take you to the bottom and the top, and sometimes simultaneously.
yeah, it's a heart explosion, I
Yes.
think, or maybe crown, heart and crown chakra, isn't it?
Yes.
And root chakra, obviously, but
Yes. And it also deals with the unknowable. It's similar, but not the same as the 12th house. But the difference is that with the 8th house, you're dealing with the unknowable. With the 12th house, you're dealing with the unconscious. There's a difference. It's subtle, but there's a difference. The 8th house, okay, you can't know what it is you're working with or dealing with, but you can sense it. And you can sense the immensity of it and the passion and the depth and the gravitas. And you can't explain it because it's outside the bounds of rationality.
But it manifests, though. That's the thing.
Yes.
It does manifest in the conscious or in
Yes.
the external. So just to help people understand this even more, can we just go through a couple of planets to give an example? For instance, if you have the sun in the 8th house, it would obviously depend on which house the sun was in, but if it's with the astrological sign, but if it's just in the 8th house, what could you expect from somebody, or what could somebody expect to experience?
There's many people with the sun in the 8th house. They go on, it's quite plutonic in certain ways, in that they're all very good at research, uncovering, digging deep, bringing things to the surface. They're very good at, on the one hand, finding out other people's secrets, but on the other hand, keeping secrets as well. They do not gossip. People with strong 8th house often gravitate towards either things like private detective, forensic accountant, criminal psychologist, investigative reporter, or they go into some type of power organization like nuclear power, mechanical power, electrical power, the idea of power, systems of empowerment. And I don't just mean psychological, I mean mechanical as well. That's a deep 8th house thing as well. There's this idea of finding the thing that generates the force of the universe, the power of the universe. And the 8th house is very good at finding out things and getting to the bottom of it.
That's so interesting. Okay, so that's sun, forensic, digging.
Yes.
That's the nature of the beast. So if we had the moon there, what would you say
Different.
about that? It's so different, isn't it?
I consider the moon in the 8th house, regardless of the sign it is, to be one of the strongest latent, not potent. Latent means it's in you. Potent means it's in you and you know you've got it and you can work with it. I consider the moon in the 8th house to be one of the most latent positions for potential psychic phenomena. And I strongly differentiate between psychic and intuitive.
Yes.
So psychic is when things happen that they got out of the blue.
It's a download, isn't it?
Yeah, you just know things and you've got no right to know and no way of knowing how you know, but you know, and that knowing is certain.
Yes, it's a vision. They've often come in visions, don't they, or messages or something like that.
Yes, yes. Or they sense things or see things that other people don't.
Yeah. And intuition is different because you feel it.
Yeah.
Whole different magic. That's kind of head and the sensation of the body, I think, in intuition.
Yeah, we're all intuitive.
Yeah, I'm also for me with clients I've seen, the moon often means something, often can mean inheritance from the female side of the family. I don't know if you've ever come across that.
Yeah, yeah. A strong eighth house often deals with inheritance either from their ancestors or for their descendants. Either way is true.
Yeah.
But there's often, not always, but in 75% of cases, there's strings attached because power.
Yeah, Pluto again.
Well, it's about either being powerful, we are trying to have control over situations. Yes, you can have this money, but only if you behave like that. Or power filled, where the power is in you and it flows through you, and you are the empowerer and the catalyst for others. I
Yeah.
love being power filled. I wouldn't want to be powerful. It's corruption.
It's completely different.
Yes, completely.
Okay, so let's go to Mercury, which is also a digger, the researcher, the
Yes.
intellect. So I
Mer-
would go on.
Mercury in the eighth. Mercury in the eighth is quite similar to the Sun, except that anybody with Mercury in the eighth house, I would trust to do my accounts because they're very good at finding everything, and they'd make a very good tax inspector, for example.
A good tax inspector. Well, we all need those, don't we?
Yes.
What about Venus? How would you interpret that? Because does she bring sensuality and sexuality into the eighth house?
Yeah, yeah. And Venus in the eighth can be a difficult one because they're dealing with so much sensation, so much potential eroticism that they can become swamped. And as a result, Venus in the eighth house can become so taken over by feelings of sensationalism and amorism that they lose rationality and become enmeshed and immersed in the sensation and the feeling, which can then, well, it stops them being human because human is a mixture of sensation and intellect. And when you lose the rational and just immerse yourself in the sensation, then you can become absorbed or consumed. So I often say to people with Venus in the eighth, you need to be constantly clear in yourself on the difference between your needs, your wants, and your desires.
So basically somebody with Venus in the eighth house has got to be very aware of their own relationship with their sexuality, their sensuality, and their relationship with beauty and their values, which is all wrapped up in that. Yeah.
Indeed. Remember, the eighth house is the opposite of the second.
Yes.
And the second house deals with resources, assets, materials, personal values, money, property. The eighth house is the opposite. It's other people's attitudes. And people with a strong Venus in the eighth can either they can either attract a lot of jealousy or they can become jealous themselves. And jealousy is a horrible emotion.
Very Scorpio, isn't it?
Yeah, it's covetiveness.
Yeah.
Covetousness. Yeah, covetedness. Yes.
Really...
They've got that and I want it. Whereas Mars in the eighth house is much easier because, well, Mars is the planet of physical action. And Mars in the eighth house can be quite simplistic. Do you want to have sex with me? Yeah, I want to have sex with you. Come on then. And then if it turns into love, great.
Right.
Of course.
The seducer, is it?
It's not that simple. It never is. But of course, people with Mars in the eighth house also need to be aware of, well, there's no easy way to put this, STDs.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just take your little rubber friends with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas the outer planets in the eighth house from Jupiter outwards have a very different meaning because the difference between planets in signs and planets in houses is that Jupiter will be in a sign for a year. Pluto will be in a sign for anywhere from 12 to 20 years. But they'll be in the eighth house for a couple of hours each day. every day, because the houses go around the sky once in a day.
Yes.
So you can never, but that is the house that the planet is in relates directly to the time of birth.
Mm.
So outer planets in the 8th house will have a much bigger impact on the way we see and assess our value to ourselves and our value in the eyes of others. And yes, the negative side of this can be jealousy, emotional manipulation, guilt tripping, shaming. The positive side of this can be that I want my success to be your success as well, because 2 and 2 equals 5. Synergy, teamwork, where everybody gains, and then there's no jealousy.
That's just really interesting. I've not thought of it like that before. So the social planets, would you say that's Jupiter and Saturn? Do they have a slightly different emphasis than the outer planets then?
Then the invisible planets, yes. A lot depends on the aspects, because as you would have worked out by now, the listeners know that to me, aspects are more important than placings.
Mm.
If a Jupiter or Saturn position receives nice aspects and it's in the 8th house, then they're going to be trustworthy. People are going to trust them. They make good bankers. People trust their value systems. They trust them with money. They're loyal. Whereas if Jupiter or Saturn gets a lot of squares or oppositions, that's when you can get greed, paucity, poverty, unfair wealth. There's an imbalance.
Or being left out of inheritances, that could definitely.
That's common.
Yeah.
Because of something she said to so and so 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Grudges.
That's interesting, isn't it? So the invisible or the outer planets, the transpersonal planets, what would you say is what do they bring to the 8th house? Let's start. Go on, Uranus.
Uranus. If you want to explore with the outer planets in the 8th house, with Uranus, you're going to have to open up to different ways of expressing your energy. You cannot, with Uranus in the 8th house, you've got to be open to different systems of empowerment. It's all about power, and it's all about the way you choose. It's about being comfortable in your own sense of individuality. With Uranus in the 8th house, you're not normal. The more you try and be normal, the more you screw up. Your ways of reaching conclusions, your assumptions are not going to be fueled or powered the same way most other people's are. There will be flashes of insight, which other people will then go, "Oh, you're spooky."
I've actually got Uranus in the 8th, and for me, it's played out like that, but it's also played out in very surprising crises that have come out of the blue and that's totally changed my direction of life. And I'm curious, and so that's been another expression for me, and I'm sure other people have had that too, who've got Uranus in the 8th.
And it's also with Uranus in the 8th, the way you react in those moments of crises.
Yes.
Because if you react the same way everybody else does, you'll probably be all right, but you'll screw up because you'll be boring and routine, and you're not like that. Whereas if people with Uranus in the 8th, they'll go left field. They'll think outside the box. They'll do the opposite of what everybody else does.
That's true.
And they'll take shortcuts and get results most of the time.
Yeah. It definitely, I'm very conscious that life can be full of surprises. Let's put it that way. So let's go to Neptune.
Neptune and Pluto, because Neptune deals with the subliminal, the neurotic, the imaginal, the spiritual. Pluto deals with psychological, the unconscious, the subconscious. They both come under the heading, the broad, generalized heading of the transpersonal. Neptune in the 8th will have an openness to spirituality, but with that will come an openness to alcoholism and addiction as well, because the 8th house does create altered states of consciousness, and they can be very tempting and alluring. You know, the great artists, the great poets, Shelley, Byron, Keats, they were opium addicts as well as fantastic poets.
Well, that's probably what created their incredible
Of course.
went out beyond into the other realms.
Destroyed them at the same time.
Yes. Well, they all died young, didn't they, really?
Yeah.
And didn't have extraordinary experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was the time of those times. The opium was very much part of their culture, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Very interesting,
And
isn't it?
Pluto in the eighth is, I consider it a great position. It can be terrifying. If you have Pluto in the eighth and you're not comfortable with Pluto, then you're going to get a lot of nightmares and you're going to feel paranoid and you're going to feel as if you're being absorbed and consumed by people and situations around you. And you can get paranoid and phobic. But if you're comfortable with Plutonian energy, then it'll bring such a capacity for transformation, not only of you internally in terms of your own psychological states, but in the ways that you can empower situations outside of you, both with other people and in the world, to a state of much more effectiveness and efficiency. And you
Mm.
can become so sharp and focused. I love Pluto in the eighth. I think it's a great position for it,
Mm.
as long as you're not scared of your own dark.
Yeah, it's the shadow stuff again, isn't it? It's actually owning your shadow. And I guess Pluto in the eighth, because it is about deepening psychologically. And Pluto wants to dig in deep there, doesn't it?
Own your shadow. You heard it, you hit it in one.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Okay, so we've covered the planets. So another thing I want to cover with you with the eighth house is this whole concept of death. Do you think or believe that the eighth house can give us a glimpse of our relationship with death, or perhaps how we might die?
No. There are other factors in the chart that speak clearer to me anyway. You cannot predict death. Anyone who can, shouldn't, couldn't, isn't, can't, you can't. But I know that there are certain combinations of planets that if someone is already elderly and infirm, and then they've got a difficult Neptune or Saturn transit coming up to the sun or moon, then it's like, okay, well, make sure all your affairs are in order. It's also about the notion of death itself. We've been led to believe for 2,000 years that at the moment of death, we get weighed and assigned to either heaven or hell. And that is just a complete fallacy, which has been fed to us by the dominators for 2,000 years. I through my studies in astrology, I've come to the inescapable conclusion that death as we understand it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as death, with a nod to the skeleton as cow of Terry Pratchett. But death is just a transition of consciousness. We just go from one dimension of existence into another. Yes, we leave this body behind, but we step into another dimension where time as we know it doesn't flow the same way as it does here. And
Yeah.
where hopefully all of our friends and people who have passed over before us are waiting and got a big party waiting for us.
I'm just wondering if you have, because the eighth house is concerned with death, I'm just wondering if you have a planet there where that could suggest perhaps the way that you may meet death. I'm just chucking this out as a question and
I,
ask.
I would dispute that. There are other factors that can talk about the method of death.
Okay.
When you see someone, for example, with a very challenged Neptune, they're more likely than average to die through addiction or something like that, or some type of glandular issue. When you see someone with a very strong Uranus, particularly with Mars or the Sun, then they're probably going to pass through electrical failure or heart attack or something like that. There are certain ways of predicting lifespan, or rather longevity of life.
Now, I've always heard that Saturn in the eighth does indicate, and Capricorn on the cusp does indicate a long life. Is that a fallacy?
I have heard this. I've not seen any proof of it. I don't dispute its potential, but I've yet to see irrevocable proof of it. But if I see someone born with the sun opposite or conjunct Saturn, or the moon opposite opposite or conjunct Saturn, it's a pretty safe bet to say they're going to see their 90s. They're going to see old age with their marbles and their mobility. Saturn bestows old age if you want to.
If you want.
And you'll keep everything intact till the day you die.
Mm. And that's the gift of Saturn, isn't it?
Oh,
Once
yes.
you engage with Saturn.
That's the payment for all the challenges of the first 40 years of life.
Oh boy, aren't there? So is there anything else you would like to say about the eighth house? You think, I need to just give them this nugget?
Yes. If you've got lots of eighth house stuff, pay your taxes. As I know, pay your taxes, keep on the right side of the law.
Yeah.
Don't hide in the dark. Bring light into the dark and dark into the light. I think the yin yang symbol is a great metaphor for the eighth house.
Yes, yes.
Bring dark into the light and light into the dark.
Well, I think that's absolutely marvelous. Again, I've learnt loads. Thank you so much, Steve. And to say to everyone, as we're putting this out before the solstice, the winter solstice, to wish everyone a really magical winter solstice.
3:28 a.m. UK time, Friday morning. I shall be out there. I'm not telling anyone where I'm going, but one or two people will know where I'll be. I'm going to one of the oldest sites in Britain, and there's only going to be about 10 people there. And if it's a clear sky, you will see the moon and Jupiter really close together that evening, and then a brilliant Venus in the southeast rising about 5 a.m. Should be spectacular.
And we'll see everybody after the winter solstice, but before New Year.
Yeah, for a special on what's coming up next year.